A warm welcome everyone to the latest Save Yourself podcast. We're going to entitle this one, What the F is Going On? As always, Sarah's here in the Future studio with me. Good day, Sarah.
Good morning to you.
I was about to say to you, we don't say good morning, do we?
No, we don't, although I just did. I do apologise. And the reason we don't say it is because we're not in mourning, are we?
No, we're not in mourning. It's a lovely day. It might be wet and rainy out there, but it's the start of another new day.
And we're feeling joyous.
Indeed we are. Obviously most of our podcasts are recorded, so I'll just note the date of this particular one, just in case the impending shitstorm starts before we upload it. It's Monday the 25th of March 2024. So, what are we going to do and what are we not going to do today?
Well, what we're not going to do is scaremonger, because that's not what we're about. We're just exploring various avenues and thoughts. And if you like, you could call it an exploration of the landscape in which we are currently living. That's the way I like to think of it. Although I have to say, what comes to mind is a Chinese curse, which was, may you live in interesting times. And we certainly do live in interesting times, which is why we want to explore what TF is going on.
Yeah, I think as you said before, this is not about scaremongering. All about our podcasts are about giving our thoughts and opinions and asking for feedback. But we are living in very troubled times, very surreal times, and although we do as many positive podcasts as we possibly can, we do need to look at the reality of what's actually going on out there.
Yeah.
We've entitled this before, Armageddon versus Apocalypse. What does that really mean? And maybe we can start there. People say, Armageddon. Now, we know, Armageddon out of here.
Indeed.
We know that, when you now go, and I don't like using the term Google, when you do an online search, and you're looking for things which are quite relevant or pertinent to you, you're not even getting the truth from an online search anymore, are you? So if you...
No, there are masterminds behind all of that, and of course they're very astute. They have all the money, they have all the resources. They can put on there whatever they want, and I know a lot of people would poo-poo that and just say, "Oh, you're just conspiracy theorists," but it's a fact. The fact is things have been removed that used to be available to us, and they're not there anymore.
Well, what is a true fact is that even if you do an online search now for Encyclopedia Britannica, is what you're finding online is not what was written, certainly not in the books of Britannica that I read when I was a child.
What's great is when you can get your hands on tomes that were written back at the pre-turn of the century.
They burned them all.
Well, that's the thing. We should be used to this kind of behaviour by now. But sadly, knowledge gets lost because when people die, they take the real knowledge, born out of having lived through something. They take that with them. And then books are burned and records are rewritten. So going back and actually finding an original book from 100, 200, 300 years ago is just such a gift, because what you're seeing then is what was genuinely happening at the time.
In a minute, we'll revert back to the two words, Armageddon and Apocalypse. What do they mean? And they seem to be linked in as well to the Doomsday, but we can cover that. But you've just reminded me of something really there, and I want to discuss what does awake and enlightened really mean as well. So I'll make note of that, because as we say, we always diversify. This is the problem with the subject matter being so massive, so vast. And as we say, this is unusual times we're living in. It's interesting times. I don't find it exciting because there's too much sadness that's going on around the world. And there always has been, but obviously with the current, I think you're going to talk about the Great Reset for those who don't really know what it means. I remember we were talking about information that is available or no longer available. I consider myself to have been awake most, if not all, of my life, and I'll give my thoughts and opinions on what awake is. But if you look on the NHS website, because I did in January 2020, we're not going to talk in too many codes here, but let's not use the obvious words, people. Let's do something like C19. Maybe people know what a C19 toxic shot might be. Let's try and keep our terminology in the wrong type of words, if you wish, Sarah, so that our podcasts don't get ripped apart like everybody else does when they're currently talking about what they believe to be the truth of the current climate.
Yeah.
But I can assure you now, if you look on the website to what that certain thing is on the NHS website, it's very different to what it was in January 2020.
Yeah.
It actually said a certain thing was related to the common cold,
Yes.
believe it or not.
Well, exactly. And
Doesn't say that now. It's
No.
all about death and destruction, isn't it? And you better go and take your next top up, for want of a better word.
well, some people would argue that that's been based on experience and knowledge, and science has uncovered more information, and so therefore they've updated it. But the fact is, they're in total denial about what they were saying at that point in time, and it does feel like a cover-up, very much.
Well, we're talking here about doom and gloom because, but I consider it to be realistic. I want to talk about topics, not topics, about what people can actually do, mindfully, physically, spiritually, to prepare for the tough times that I believe are still going to come.
Yeah, we have to be realistic. I mean, the fact is, there is some crazy stuff going on out there in the world, and people can't be entirely unaware of the fact that there's been a lot of warmongering going on. Exactly who's behind that? Well, we could speculate about all sorts of people. We don't want to get involved in the politics of it all, but it's not good. That they are determined to have a fight if they can. Yeah. So anyway, I despair, actually. What's going on is nothing new, and it's just, for me, it feels like it's just the next iteration of what's been happening at the hands of man or the hidden controllers since the dawn of time. So we're not looking at anything unusual.
But this time, is it on a greater scale due to the Great Reset and to the depopulation agenda?
There is an absolute determined effort to make this potentially the last battle of its sort, but who knows? I mean, maybe that's the way they always felt every time they warmongered and had the First World War, Second World War, and everything else in between, that went before it and has happened since.
Well, it's not just about wars as well. One of the things we're going to talk about again is the obvious subject of frequency and vibration and the damage that they did when they switched on radio, when they switched on radar, and we'll look at just coincidentally what viruses came out around about the same time.
Yeah.
But let's go back to where we started then. So the words Armageddon, the words Apocalypse, and what is the Doomsday book then? So I'm normally a gentleman, but on this occasion I will go first. In my opinion, I've always viewed Armageddon to be, if you wish, man against man, or man's own pathetic and selfish destruction of the natural world that we live in. Whether that's by nuclear war, whether it's by just standard traditional global warfare, or whether it's just one person inflicting injury and pain upon another. So I see Armageddon as man's inhumanity to man. The apocalypse, obviously if you study this online, will say it's a similar thing, but obviously this is actually the end game. So maybe Armageddon is the battle and apocalypse is the outcome. But we need to remember that, to me, I believe that the apocalypse can be also considered to be a spiritual uplifting. And maybe it needs to be if obviously it's related to the end of the world. But I'll just finish there on the Doomsday book. We said earlier about we're not going to scaremonger. The Doomsday book was written in, I think it was around about 1947, something like that. But it was about saying that the biggest global catastrophe of all time would obviously be East versus West, Russia versus NATO, if you wish, in a state of nuclear and ballistic warfare. But I still believe that was all based upon scaremongering. And I've got some first-hand experience of that, as you know, with my time in the military. But yeah, so scaremongering has always been there. But what's your opinion on Apocalypse, Armageddon and the Doomsday book, Sarah?
Well, there's nothing quite like scaring people to get them where you want them to be, which is very often hiding and frightened and not actually standing up and offering any kind of resistance. So, that obviously works in their favour. So being scared doesn't help you. As far as apocalypse goes, my understanding is that it comes from the Greek for unveiling or some kind of a reveal leading to the end of something, end of times, end of the world, whatever it might be the end of your shopping list. I don't know. It's the end of something. And then Armageddon is a fight. It's a battle. So, if you look at the Bible, I mean, a lot of people probably familiar with the Bible.
Well, both of the words, their origins are really Bible related, aren't they?
Yeah, they are completely, and they're in the book of Revelation. Don't ask me which chapters, but I'm sure you can find it if you go looking. So they're both represented there, but exactly what the origins are. I don't know. I don't have the original writings, so it's very difficult to say.
So, whether there is an impending Armageddon or apocalypse, and whether the Doomsday book, which I believe is seconds away now, where it dropped back something like 17 minutes at one point away from ticking to the clock of the end of the world, what do we actually really see going on out there? How do you want to start this conversation? Because, as you say, this isn't the beginning of something. We're already headlong into it. And, no matter how far you go back in history, the amount of pain and suffering that's been inflicted upon mankind is catastrophic, and it still is. So even if there wasn't a war, there is still so much pain and suffering going on out there at a personal level.
Yeah. Well, if you think about the lineage of the families and the people who have been historically in control of this, the fathers, grandfathers, great-great-great-grandfathers, maybe even mothers, I don't know, who have caused a lot of this suffering. It's man's inhumanity to man, and it just seems to be endless infliction of suffering without any kind of recourse. It's like they just get away with it. And they have manipulated centuries of activities in an attempt to depopulate the world. I mean, if anyone has, you mentioned the Great Reset earlier on, which was written by Klaus Schwab, who's head of the World Economic Forum. What a nasty piece of work. I mean, just unbelievably nasty. I mean, talk about Bond villain. I mean, he goes way, head and shoulders above the worst Bond villain we've ever seen. Nasty, has awful plans for everybody. You will own nothing and be happy. Some people may never have even heard of him or read the book or even thought about what his plans might be. But this is not a man who cares about you one jot.
Well, if I can just interject there, because we talk about villains. There's many villains out there, isn't there? I mean, sort of the way that I look at this is the reason why I think our current climate is worse than what we've had before is that we've heard of global pandemics before. We've had World War. We've had crash of the financial system. But I think this is all happening simultaneously. And when you talk about villains, we do need to obviously talk about the perfect Bond villain, Mr. Schwab, and what he's tried to achieve and what he's still trying to achieve. And then, of course, there's the royal family and the catastrophe that apparently they're going through at this moment in time. Apparently a couple of members have got cancer out of the blue. We'll come on to these various, I don't even want to call them conspiracies, but because otherwise we're towing the line of what... Because the word conspiracy theory was set up by the CIA, wasn't it? But I think that we need to look at this moment in time, all of the catastrophes that have particularly gone on in history all seem to be there right now. So there is dissent amongst the people. And let's look at the effect of this then. So allegedly there's been a global pandemic which will result in cost to the individual, of course, because obviously what we need to look at this current day and age is that with the financial system allegedly about to collapse, with there being an alleged global pandemic, with there about to be the start of World War III, etc., how does that actually affect the individual? And more importantly, how are the individuals already being affected? So if we now look at any individual that we know as family and friends and associates and people are out there, and obviously we don't know what our audience is. The reason why I know there you mentioned about the Great Reset, we don't know whether our audience is going to be 100% what people might consider wide awake, or people for the first time coming in and saying, what did they just say? There's going to be a war. The pandemic Was it really a pandemic? Is there really going to be a global financial crash? Well, we're going to give our opinion on all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The thing that always occurs to me, people say things like follow the money. And if you look at any war that's happened in history or any major catastrophe that's happened in history, the people tend to be the ones who suffer all the stress and the death and the loss and the kind of, they lose in all ways, including financially. But if you think about the benefactors, the people who actually benefit financially, the people who come out of it scot-free, if you look at that, they say, follow the money, follow the money, follow the money. Look at those people, the people who've made the money. They will be the ones behind it, or at least they're linked to the ones behind it, because it's like a big club. They're all in it together.
And then, of course, you've got not just follow the money, but follow the white rabbit. Obviously, there's been many people that's been doing that over the last 3 or 4 years. But obviously, many people have been doing this for decades. But obviously, the fact that this alleged pandemic, this alleged virus, which we're going to have to talk about this, along with all of the subjects, what is real, what is not real, and how do you perceive it to be? But let's just go through a couple of points that we've made so far then already. You mentioned Bond villains. Obviously, we can talk about Hollywood today. What really is Hollywood, and what catastrophes have they predicted so far that have come true? So I think Hollywood is certainly worth a mention, but like everything else, we could talk for hours on each particular subject that we raise. So Hollywood has in itself been a prediction or a creator of predictions, hasn't it?
Well, there seems to be, I've heard this from various avenues, different people have said this. They whoever they are, behind the scenes, seem to get some pleasure out of hiding everything in plain sight. So they're not hiding anything at all. They're basically revealing all the time. And apparently they have used the Hollywood machine to get their message out, which is basically, they're laughing at us, really.
And look how, it's a game to them.
Yeah.
Sort of the Hunger Games, it's just a game to watch the downfall of humanity. But, sort of in addition to Hollywood, look at The Simpsons. If you look at the Simpson episodes now, it's just bizarre how they have predicted, so many events.
Yeah, bizarre that they knew what was coming, huh?
Indeed. You also mentioned, like we said before, about Bond movies. I know that Mark Devlin does a talk on Bond, showing that, again, that was all part of the same setup. Is when you really understand who James Bond was supposed to be and you understand the villains, again, everything was in plain sight.
Yeah.
I brought in the royal family there. Do you want to do a quick overview on what your thoughts currently are of the royal family, the state of the royal family, the origins of the royal family? We need to discuss it because they're part of this, aren't they?
Yeah, well, it's been an incredibly clever setup. Not just in the UK. If you look at the heads of Europe and the various European, Europe is at the heart of all of this, really. And if you look at the dynasties that have run throughout Europe, but then again, we've got dynasties that have now started up and run in modern America. So it's a tricky one. I was always quite pro the royal family as a youngster, and I'd like to think I did meet Prince Charles once. Sorry, King Charles, or whatever he's called these days.
Sausage fingers, I believe it's called.
I did meet him once. He came to my graduation show in London and dived his fingers into my fried egg rug, which I know sounds bizarre, but anyway, you had to be there. So I never had a negative thought, really. I just thought, well, they're just other.
It was an acceptance.
It was a total acceptance that they were just top and we were bottom, and that was just the way it was. So I never really had an opinion, but what I feel these days is just massive disappointment, huge disappointment, because I don't know what the truth of the royal family is, and maybe we never will know, but all I do know is they're not very nice people. The huge amount of skullduggery around what happened to Diana and what's currently happening to Catherine. It's you can't help but think these poor young women, okay, they've ended up living a life of luxury if you perceive it that way, but they've also ended up just being pawns in their game.
Well, someone once made a statement when they said, if you look at the people who live in Buckingham Palace, are they in the ivory tower looking out, or have we got the freedom and they're the ones that's locked in?
Yeah, they're in a prison of
Absolutely.
sorts. Yeah.
Now let's go to this little story then about sort of something historically. So we've got these people that are in control. How long have they been in control? And what was their control mechanism? Now, obviously, Sarah and I are giving our opinion, but we're also sharing other people's thoughts and opinions. So let's just go back just a short amount of time then. Let's just go back maybe, I don't know, a fair few hundred years or just over 1,000 years or whatever. Let's maybe go back to the Roman Empire and at the times of Jesus. And I have my opinions on who Jesus is and is not. But we haven't got round to the religious conversation podcast yet. It may turn a few people on and a few people off. But again, it's only our opinion. But this control mechanism by those people, those evil people, they really are, that want to take control, they did take control, they initially took control of people by either scaremongering throughout religion, becoming God-fearing. Yeah. Then they created a financial system. So allegedly, the route from the top down to the bottom is you've got the controllers who created the religious or part of the religious protocols and procedures, which are owned by the Vatican, and the Vatican owns the royal family, and the royal family get the politicians to work for them and other corporations, etc. So we can see this clear lineage coming from a few people that are controlling the masses.
Yeah, well, it feels very much like people with some level of sophistication versus the innocent. If you think about, when we're born innocent. And if you imagine, hundreds of years ago, born into a village, you were part of a small community or a tribe where everybody had a role and they looked after each other. There was a simplicity and a connection with nature and living, in such an innocent way. Obviously, they had strife. They had to make sure they had shelter and food and water and all the rest of it. But then imagine someone stepping in who happened to have a bit of knowledge or education of some sort. They could baffle those people quite easily, I would suspect. And it's not hard to take control of innocent people. It's like we witness it in our landscape where we're currently living, where there are the sheep on the landscape. They are completely innocent creatures.
Well, I was about to say to you, actually, Sarah, that this is not just pain and suffering on behalf of humanity. The amount of pain that these evil people and their construct and the way that they've developed this matrix, the amount of suffering that the animals have taken from laboratory rats and rabbits that suffered all the amount of experimentation, and chimpanzees, which fortunately there was good, strong people who stood up to that, to the current day where we've seen birds dropping out the sky. And people are saying, well, don't be silly. Birds aren't dropping out of the sky. Yes, they have.
Yeah.
And
in their droves with 5G turn on.
Well, exactly. Yeah. Again, we are doing a podcast on 5G. And, the thing is, again, it's all about frequency and vibration. I want to talk about that. And I want to talk about the alleged previous pandemics. But let's just do that briefly now. 5G is a bioweapon. And at the end of the day, I think everyone would agree that their internet works quite well on 4G, which is also unnecessary as it happens, but that's another story. Getting into communications and speed of things and people wanting to, to me, if we don't get back to nature and we don't get back to creating smaller communities, then a lot of these people out there at this moment in time, and I'm not going to name drop or shout out who I think shills are or who I think which people are controlled opposition, but
there's certainly quite a few of them.
Let's think about this from an intelligence point of view, and I don't just mean a military intelligence point of view or people that got that bent to look at what's really going on. Is that we know all this was a setup. So if it was a setup, they've had decades to prepare for this. So be careful who you trust and who you believe in, because they've got a hell of a handle and a control of what's going on within the so-called truther movement. But that's we'll not do the name dropping bit today. Now, going back to the animals again then, Sarah, and talking about 5G, there has been an incredible amount of damage that's been done to the bees, to the birds, etc. But
and the people, there are a lot of people who've been massively affected by 5G turn on. I know that it hasn't come on fully yet, but they've done tests.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier about birth. Obviously, one of the subject matters is birth certificate and people actually correcting their records. The problem with our podcasts, as we know, many of these podcasts we do have been recorded. So I'm talking about a subject today which we've already recorded. We've already recorded many podcasts now about the law, about people understanding their sovereignty. But, again, let's just do this as a reminder. Your parents unwittingly signed you up to a birth certificate.
Yeah.
All you need is proof that what's called a live born record to prove that you are a living soul.
Yeah.
And as we know, the system was set up to cast you off to sea, and you are not a man of the land. You have been. You're a dead soul.
I was going to say we're registered as dead rather than living.
Yep.
Which is just crazy. It's not a birth certificate; it's a death certificate.
So let's look at. I've given 3 categories there: an alleged virus, / pandemic, potential war, and I mean a global war, a world war, and the financial system. Anything else you want to add to the current amount of catastrophe that's going on?
Oh, well, that pretty much covers everything. I would say the breakdown of society through division, which has been very deliberately sown. If you think about the kind of division that has happened through the last 4 or 5 years, is, people who did take the JAB and those who didn't, and that's had families falling apart. Yeah. People not being allowed to be at the side of their loved ones when they were dying. So locked in hospitals, people locked out so they couldn't get together. The kind of things that have been inflicted on people to basically break us apart. You divide and conquer, don't you? So if you can manage to break society up into smaller chunks of division, then eventually we're just scattered and we're in chaos, and they're just laughing all the way to the bank.
Well, let's give our opinion then on these 3 subjects: virus, war, and the financial system. But just before we do, the outcome of all of this is the one thing that I think a lot of people have missed. Now, that's obviously not the current farming community or the people supporting the current farming community, because the biggest catastrophe of all time would be to have no water. Hopefully we can all still access water, but the next thing in then would be food, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So we know who is buying up all the land. We know who's trying to make GMO food and get us to eat insects. But the problem with the food supply, and this is where we do need to talk. We're going to finish this podcast off today with what can we do? But let's break these areas down first of all then. So during previous alleged plagues or pandemics, the food supply was affected.
Yeah.
During world wars, the food supply is affected.
Yeah.
And a crash with the financial system, the food supply is affected. So get yourself clean water the best you possibly can. Make sure that you're stocking up and storing on, and we're going to talk a little bit about stockpiling. But, food is the biggie.
Yeah.
Now, we've already done a podcast talking about fuel, and this is incredibly important. If you're getting grounded, if you're getting sunlight, if you're getting structured, energized water, your food consumption can be dramatically reduced. So I just wanted to reiterate that again in this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We all eat more than we need to, most people. I mean, obviously there are people out there who are very controlled in what they eat, but the majority of people are not only eating too much, but they're probably eating the wrong things. So they're eating high sugar foods, stuff that might give them a bit of energy in that moment, but actually not sustaining foods. So if people eat better quality food, eat less of it, but make sure that they maximise access to sunlight. Get out and get grounded.
When modern day nutritionists have looked back now, not suggesting that this is what we want to happen, another war, but obviously during World War II, when people were on rations, in general, their overall health, their cardiovascular health, their non-contracting of cancer, and I say contracting of cancer, we're going to do a full podcast on what cancer truly is and is not, as we're about to do with a virus is and is not today. But yeah, so we do need to look at nutrition and food during potential impending difficult times.
Yes.
So let's start then. Let's do those 3 subjects for today then. So let's have a look at this so-called virus. As I mentioned before, is everything is about frequency and vibration on this planet, and frequency and vibration, as we've learned about water, is happening at a molecular level. And when you look around the actual planet and look at previous, let's call them plagues or pandemics, is we need to talk about the germ theory and the terrain theory. You and I both understand both of those theories, and we've talked about them many times, but I think this is relevant to now go back in time. So when we've looked at some of the great plagues before, let's talk about communities again. So when they started to build these larger communities and concrete jungle, the first thing you need to do is go back and provide water. If you're providing water with poor sanitation and rats living amongst it, it's hardly surprising that all of a sudden people became sick. And as we know, is when they stopped using and drinking out of those municipal areas.
Yeah.
And first of all, someone went, well, hang on, it must be in the water.
Yeah, I was thinking the other day about India and the Ganges. And the Ganges was renowned for being a healing source, a healing river. But with people starting to overuse it and obviously conurbations building up around that water along the path of the water, at the top end of the Ganges it still is healing, but at the bottom end of the Ganges it's just toxic. It's toxic soup.
Yeah.
So the water courses have been toxified one way or another.
Yeah. So in our opinion, there are bacterial infections. There is the way to infect others if you're actually drinking or being around water which has been polluted or poisoned or corrupted.
Yeah.
So now the other thing, going back to frequency and vibration, is that when we understand that if you were to turn on a 5G cell tower in a local area, we've seen the damage that's been done. We've seen trees losing their leaves. We've seen birds falling out of trees.
Yes.
You know, we've seen people having severe illnesses when they are very close to something emanating so much power in a local vicinity.
And not only that, they have deliberately gone in whenever they were putting a cell tower in. They've gone in and they've cut down the trees, supposedly to clear the way so that the signal doesn't get absorbed. Doesn't that tell you everything? The trees are taking a hit for us.
Yeah.
So if they cut them down, we take the hit.
Absolutely. So let's, we've obviously got to be cautious of our time with these podcasts. Let's try and be quite direct about this then. So yes, there have been previous, let's call them situations where many people have been sick and that they've died. And I think that's down to bacterial infection, to poor sanitation, as we've said already. And there have been previous times prior to 5G when things have been turned on, like radar, like radio waves. When you are sending frequencies out into the, what do you want to call it, the atmosphere?
The natural environment.
Or the natural environment,
Yeah.
there is going to be alterations
and a conflict.
made and conflict.
Yeah.
So without going into too much detail, I believe that a lot of the previous things where we've seen people become unwell have been caused by exactly that.
Yeah,
now,
triggered in a way that the body wasn't expecting and wasn't ready for because we haven't adapted or hadn't.
Yeah. So let's do the thing on viruses then. You know, what is a virus? Does a virus exist? What does viral mean? Can you contract an illness or a condition from somebody else? And as we've said, your skin is your biggest organ. I personally don't believe there's any such thing as airborne contagions, but I do think that you can pick things up from people's skin because the skin is, you know, the biggest organ in the body. So it's going to absorb things in and it's going to shed things out. That's where the term shedding comes from.
Yeah.
But to try and sort of direct this and to be quite direct, for want of a better word, is that, in my opinion, I don't believe SARS-CoV-1 was ever isolated, let alone SARS-CoV-2, neither MERS. And then there's question over all sorts of other viruses that may or may not exist. The point is that SARS-CoV-2 has not been isolated. And we know, or we believe, that this whole thing is a scam to get people to be injected. And we also need to discuss what we believe to be the contents of the injection and looking at what has actually happened. So, allegedly, there's a virus, whether it comes from bats, whether it comes from birds, wherever it comes from Wuhan, wherever it comes from. I'm not really interested in that. What I'm interested in is the results that have come in. Now, we know back in the early days, People were suffering from cytokine storms, they were struggling to breathe, and they were forced onto a ventilation system, which would have just damaged their lungs and killed them.
Yeah.
And as you say, the result of all of that was people being locked down, which obviously is a prison term, and the amount of pain and disruption placed upon people not being able to be with their sick loved ones. And we've got all the statistics of the truth behind all of this. You know, our good friend Andrew Mather at Peerless Reads documented everything that they said. And even if you weren't a conspiracy theorist and just listened to what they were saying, every single thing changed all the time. It was just lie after lie after lie.
Yeah, and you know, one thing I think we absolutely have to be clear on is that we're not denying that people were unwell, because there was a definitely something going around, and I went down with it myself, and I was ill for about 3 weeks.
Well, let's be clear about this: is that CV-19 is symptomology. It is the result of an alleged virus. So, let's go back to the simple part first of all. Then is when people truly understand what the human body is and the environment that it's living in. So you exercise, you sweat. You know, that seems to be a natural thing that you accept is, well, that's what happens. I exercise, I sweat. So let's go back to the other things that are normally happening that you do not accept. So let's imagine that, let's call these things seasonal detoxifications.
I was going to say, seasonal detox, yeah.
Why is it that people say, oh, I've got a really bad cold in the winter, or I've picked up the summer flu? Well, I'd like to give a simple explanation to that. If you have been spending all of your spring and summer partying, eating junk food, being on the beer, doing all the things that you consider are not very healthy,
getting on an aeroplane.
by the time then that the winter comes, and obviously we're not talking just about frequency and vibration, we're talking about hot and cold, we're talking about temperature. So if you've been warm and active during the winter months, but you've been awake for longer, because obviously the sunrise and the sunsets are longer during the summer than they are in the winter, that you've then abused yourself and you've thought, well, I'm going to party and drink more and not look after myself and not exercise right, and I'm going to do this, and you've punished yourself. As the temperatures drop and you slow down, your body, which is designed to heal itself and always will do what's right for you, says, okay, I need to detoxify.
Yeah.
To detoxify, how do I do that? Via mucus, via sweat, and they call that an illness.
Yeah.
Well, it's not an illness, it's your body doing you a favour. It's actually sweating out and using mucus to get all that toxification out of your body.
Yeah.
And if you've overdone it too much, it will floor you, your body will floor you to say, actually, let's call this the flu then. You're not even going to move and exercise or move around because I need to detoxify your entire system.
Yeah.
And then why does that happen in the summer? Because some people do it the other way. They stay indoors, put the fire on, get themselves red hot on the inside. So you're actually getting your body in a position to say, well, I'm overheating. And then as the weather starts to come back to what we might consider normal during spring and summer, your body says, right, I need to detoxify all of this stuff that's been picked up during the winter. So you might be ill once or twice a year.
Yeah.
And, be grateful for that. Instead of saying, oh no, I've got the cold or I've got a flu and I need all this medication to get it out of me. No, you don't. You actually need to let it come out of you. Don't be rushing to, go and, I need to spray this and breathe that in and take this tablet. No, you don't. Your body's trying to heal itself by detoxifying.
Yeah, and you just need to look after yourself and drink plenty of fluids and rehydrate, properly using energized structured water so that your body can hydrate on a cellular level and cleanse everything out. So do a detox, do a reset.
Now, the great news is, on the back of this so-called alleged pandemic and this dreadful virus, some wonderful people got together really, really quickly and found a cure for it, didn't they, allegedly? So they jabbed you once and twice and third and fourth time and gave you boosters, did that and this and the other. So we don't need to do that story today if people haven't worked out what happened once they took those. And that's when obviously you started to become ill. It was the content of those that were doing it, along with the other external factors we've just discussed, is what was in these things then?
Yeah.
Well, go and have a look at the list of contents and ask yourself if you think that's got anything to do with protecting yourself against an alleged virus. But you've also seen the outcome of this and the outpouring of knowledge and true information. There's all these people that have dropped dead, all these sports players.
Of people who should have been at the peak of their health and fitness, and they're just dropping like flies on the football pitches.
And yet people still, apparently, they can't see any of this. So it's not a conspiracy theory, it's a fact. So the question is, you need to be looking at what's in these things. Now, apart from the things in there that you really don't want inside of your body, and we haven't got time today to talk about, how the body changes at a cellular level. If you haven't worked out what a virus is and is not, and whether or not you should be actually having something injected you to try and counteract it, well, I think it's possibly a little bit too late for you, but not quite, because we think we do have a few solutions that we can obviously give to people to try and help them to deal with this, haven't we?
Yeah, we have. And it's something we've been putting together, some protocols to help people to rid their bodies of some of the toxins and some of the deposits that will have been left in their system.
However, in addition to the harmful ingredients that's gone in, and maybe we should actually touch on, are we anti-vaxxers, not anti-vaxxers at all? If I thought that someone could be injected with something that was going to benefit them, then I'd be all up for it, even though I probably wouldn't, because I still believe in my own immune system.
Well, I think that nature has provided us with pretty much everything that we need, and the only time that we need, or rather that we fail at doing that, is when we're overloaded because of something that is unnatural in the environment.
The body is designed to heal itself. Just give it the time to do so. And as you say, remove yourself from the toxic environment that you're living in. Now, here comes the problem. We can't do that, can we?
So, not easily, and not everybody can. So,
well,
what can they do practically?
Well, let's just cover those last two subjects, and then we're going to go on to what we believe the solution is. So, we're not anti-vaxxers, but how many vaccinations do children get now compared to the few that we've got?
Well, I heard 72 at the last count. It's like, why would you do that to your child?
Say no more, and you guys work out whether or not vaccinations are good for you or not. Common sense needs to prevail.
Yeah.
Now, the biggie about detoxification and doing a detox plan, and an ongoing one, is not only have the ingredients of these so-called vaccines. Well, I'm not even going to discuss it anymore. I'm just going to move on to the next thing. Are we all aware of what graphene oxide is? Are you aware of what graphene oxide is, Sarah? Because it's definitely in those vaccines, and it's definitely in the water supply, and it's definitely in the rainfall, and it's definitely in processed food.
I remember years ago on Tomorrow's World on TV, if you remember, they talked about graphene oxide, and I remember them talking about this incredible molecular structure that would become one molecule thick, and it could just spread and spread and spread and spread. And they were using it for all sorts of things, and it was magnetic, and it was metal, and it was...
So is there any coincidence, do you think, that graphene oxides in your body and 5G could actually interact with that? Do you think that's a coincidence, or is that another conspiracy?
Well, who knows, and only time will tell, but I think people are being massively affected by it already. I mean, I've heard horror stories that, apparently your till receipts, the ink that they're using on till receipts in the supermarket is actually printed graphene oxide. So as you go and do your shopping and you just happen to pick that piece of paper up at the end, and the skin absorbs so much stuff, it's the biggest organ in the body. So yeah, shocking.
So the second subject then, so that's a quick overview of a virus. The war. What do we think about Third World War, Sarah? Is it likely to happen?
Well, I think what's interesting is that there are obviously people don't want to believe that it could possibly happen, but I would say that we're in it already. Wars come in different guises. Not every war is going to be someone standing at your door with a gun or mortar bombing your village. Wars can be fought on lots of different levels, and some people would say that this is a spiritual war. Well, I think this is a very real and physical war, and we've been under attack for a long, long time. Yeah,
it's both, isn't it? There is a physical war going on, but there is a spiritual battle going on as well. But the spiritual battle, let's come on to that when I think we've already done a podcast already on mind, body and soul, but I'm talking here about the physical war. I think physical war is looking highly likely. For all the obvious reasons.
But people will always be in denial about it until it's on their own doorstep. You know, if it's happening across in Ukraine, if it's happening across in Russia, and we live thousands of miles or hundreds of miles away, people don't seem to care.
But as we started this conversation off, a so-called virus with a potential world war, with a crash to the financial system, with starvation coming along, I think the saying is, don't be afraid and don't be scared, be prepared. And we're going to come on to hopefully giving some solutions, aren't we? So there is war going on at this moment in time. There always has been. You know, there's even war in peacetime with what's going on at local levels in many countries, isn't there? It doesn't have to be a global war, but the war is looking quite likely. And, you know, there's plenty of preppers out there telling you what's really going on that you're not seeing in the press and the mainstream media. Just as you're not seeing what's really going on with Harry and William and Charlie and Kate, etc., because obviously you're not going to get the truth from the general media, are you?
Oh, God, no. No chance.
So that brings us on to the third subject then. So we've touched on virus and touched on war. What about this collapse of the financial system? What's your thoughts on that?
It's so confusing for people, isn't it? Because all their lives, you know, they've been part of a system, and they've paid their taxes, and they've paid their national insurance, and they're, you know, guaranteed a pension, and they've been putting, you know, things into ISAs, and they've been, you know, investing and being very sensible and doing all the right things for a pittance of a kickback. You know, they're not really making any money, but you've been pushed into this complicated system that makes you feel like you're part of it. You're part of something.
Well,
but the fact is, there are people out there behind the scenes. They make money hand over fist in very different ways. You know, they own all the gold, or they own all the silver, or they own all the assets. You know, they are just dripping real wealth, whereas we will never do that.
Well, we have got some friends and associates going to be talking to us in detail about money. But in short, as you know, money doesn't exist. It's just a fallacy, because, you know, where is all the true wealth of gold? Well, do you really know what the amount is and where it's been shifted? But it doesn't really matter whether something's gold backed or whether it is not. The point is that the true value of money is not a true value, is it? So if anyone was ever questioning this, you know, let's use common sense. So prior to the alleged pandemic, there was a global financial catastrophe coming down, and then all of a sudden everyone's staying at home, and there are billions of pounds lost in industry, and then there is warfare going on, etc., 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 etc. Even if there was any such thing as money being a real thing, well, it would have all gone by now, wouldn't it? So they're even in control of when and how this financial system will crash. But, you know, all of these things coming in together, it doesn't look good for people, does it?
Well, no. And then they've further confused things with all the digital currencies coming in. So, you know, it's a minefield, you know, and you know, I've dabbled in the digital currencies and managed to double, treble the money that I put in quite happily, took the money out again and spent it. You know, that worked for me. But if you put money into those systems and you lose a password, or you lose a key, you know, a keychain or whatever it is, you know, you've lost it, you know, and there's no way of getting it back. And so it's been overcomplicated so that the average normie person, such as myself, hasn't got a chance.
So let's move on to solutions while we've hopefully got a little bit of time. We've spent more time talking about the problem rather than the solution, which ideally I'd rather be the other way, but we have to be cautious.
You've got to unpack it.
We've got to be cautious about how long these podcasts go on for, but let's be quite simple and direct with the solution then, because the solutions are quite simple and quite straightforward, aren't they? What can you do? Well, first of all, you've got to look after yourself.
Yes.
One way or the other, mindfully, physically and soulfully. You have got to look after yourself. Number 2, you've got to detoxify the rubbish that's been put into you. Number 3...
Or that you have put into yourself.
Yep. Number 3, you have got to have some form of natural survival skills, because whether there is a shitstorm that lasts for a week, a month or 3 years or a decade, you have to become self-sufficient, self-empowered.
Yeah.
You have to have that natural skill set to say, well, I'm on my own with this, which brings us back to communities again.
Yes.
Now, I don't want to talk about the communities I've been involved with or the way that I've seen these communities set up, but I'm not wholeheartedly convinced that they've done it correctly. But I do believe that the outcome of any form of survival is to get the trusted people who you know to be close together, to bring in your individual skill sets and live in small communities, because otherwise we're in danger, even if the shitstorm doesn't come, of certain people trying to create the Matrix Part 2.
Exactly. And what we have to bear in mind is, we talk about needing to save yourself, empower yourself, but you do also need, you can't be an island, you need to be part of a community. You need to gird yourself round with people whom you trust and whom you value and who value you. And also you're all bringing different skills together. So as a community will only ever be as good as the sum of its parts. So if you come in as the best you can be, offering all those wonderful skills and knowledge and experience that you have, then you will build a brilliant community.
Yeah.
And that community will survive.
And if you can't build a community, and if you are living in an isolated place, then you've got to go back and look at those three subjects: detox, survival, personal protection. So just briefly for today, and we'll put links in and we'll put supporting information in. If you have had one of these toxic shots, or if you, which is probably all of us, have got graphene oxide inside of you, we're going to offer some information on what you can do to detox in general, to detox some of the contents of the shot, or if not all of them, and to get this graphene oxide out of your body on a regular basis. So
and we know lots of people who are doing that kind of work alongside what we're doing, and we will share their websites and their links as well. It's not just about what we're doing.
So that's the detox. Secondly, personal survival. You need to get some stockpile in place. Now, again, we can write a short report on this, and we can attach it and we can post it on what fuel to get, how to make sure you're getting clean water, what foods are likely to last over a period of time. And I know most people are annoyed by this. They're just like, I've been preparing for this for the last 8 years. Now all my kidney beans are out of date. You have to keep doing this, I'm afraid.
Stock rotation.
You've got to do stock rotation. So we'll post our thoughts on what we consider to be basic survival skills, not only food that you can grow of your own, but which foods will last and preserve better than others. And then, whether you like it or not, you do need to have some personal protection training. We've done many courses already, haven't we? To show people when you should approach someone, when you should back off, what sort of equipment you have around your house, your home, and things that you can legally purchase to give yourself an element of personal protection. So again, we will post some links on this, along with some of our personal comments on the things you can do to stand your own ground. And it's not always aggression. Sometimes, we've worked with some incredible people over the years, or I certainly have, where the best thing to do is talk yourself out of an aggressive situation. And you can only do that by having the confidence to know what to do and what to say in a multitude of scenarios.
And it's only really if you think it through and talk it through and act it through that you're prepared.
And this is what we're trying to say here. Let's change our focus. It's all right to say everything's going to be okay. I hope it is. If it's not, let's be prepared rather than scared. So we're going to be putting a lot of information out on this. Hopefully, as I said, we're not here to scaremonger. We're trying to get you to focus and say, if there was such a severe situation, what can I do to prepare for it?
And what I would like to add is, I totally understand that there's a lot of people who don't even want to acknowledge any of this. There's a huge amount of cognitive dissonance going on, which is to be expected. Nobody wants to accept that they've been duped. Nobody wants to accept that they may be facing something that is going to cause them stress and distress. So and as Glyn says, be prepared, not scared.
Right, well, I think that's enough for today. How about you?
I reckon that's probably enough, although it does feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
As always, because the subject matters are so deep. So for now, it's goodbye from you. And it's goodbye from me.
And it's good night from him.
And it's goodbye from both of us. Okay, until next time. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Glyn.